Hey everyone, it's Editing Ivy here. I just got finished filming this collaboration with Maevius Lynn, and oh my gosh, we talked about so many different things. I'm gonna have timestamps down below, so if there's particular topics that you're interested in hearing about, feel free to skip to those topics because we did a deep dive today. We did a deep dive on Thelema, and there is so much juicy information in here. So if you aren't aware, Aleister Crowley is arguably one of the most famous and influential occultists, and he founded what is called Thelema. Thelema is a philosophy and a religion, and we're going to be talking today about what it means to be a Thelemite and what Thelema actually is. There's a lot of stigma and a lot of negative stereotypes attached to Thelema from people that don't really understand what it is that's actually happening in this practice. So today, Maevius Lynn has graciously agreed to come on the channel to help demystify some of that fog, some of those illusions on the practice. In addition, I did want to put a disclaimer that we're not necessarily going to be talking about Aleister Crowley too much today. We're more focusing on the actual practice of Thelema. I am going to have another guest on this channel, hopefully at the end of this next month. It should be pretty soon, but we're going to talk about the life of Aleister Crowley and really deep dive into this influential and controversial occultist. But today is not really about Aleister Crowley. He is mentioned throughout the conversation. We do talk about him a little bit, but it's more so about Thelema, the religion and the philosophy that he left behind. Hello everyone, today we're going to be talking about Aleister Crowley's Thelema, and I have Maevius Lynn here joining me today. Lynn is one of my friends. We have done this collaboration before, so when I first started my YouTube channel, we did this whole video, what is Thelema, but I think it was only like 30 minutes long or something like that, and I was not as good. I wasn't as knowledgeable in Thelema yet, and then also I wasn't as good of an interviewer. I hope I'm a lot better now. So I wanted to redo this conversation to get a little bit deeper into the nitty-gritty of what it means to be a Thelemite. So Lynn and I are friends. We've definitely collaborated a few times. We've met in person, had lunch and things like that. So I adore her so much. But do you want to introduce yourself to everyone and then talk about like your current projects coming up if you have any, your channel, all that stuff?
Sure, absolutely. And thank you for that lovely introduction. I am so blessed to have Ivy as a friend. And when we met up, I was able to take you to one of my favorite Italian restaurants. So that was super fun. Thank you for that.
It was so good.
Yeah,
Yes, I
I'm
know it
so
was really
glad.
good. Anyway.
And anyway, so hey everyone, I'm Lynn. My baptismal name is Maevius Lynn. So if you find me on social media or some of the things I've written and published, I use Maevius Lynn. Yeah, I'm a Thelemite, a teacher. My specialty is in this area called ceremonial magic. And within ceremonial magic, I mainly practice and talk about Thelema. And my main motivation is to make this stuff accessible and exciting and share something I love. So that's why I'm on YouTube and I write, and I'm here today. And also, Ivy is here.
Yeah. You teach, I mean, I attended at Mystic South one of your workshops. It was an introduction to the Thoth Tarot, and it was so good. I mean, the classes and the workshops that you hold are just phenomenal, like 5-star all around. And also your channel is really accessible for beginners that don't really know much about ceremonial magic, that are maybe kind of interested in Thelema, but don't really know what it is. I think what you're doing is so fantastic because we don't see a lot of ceremonial magicians online. So I just really appreciate your presence and you being here to help beginners kind of, maybe move into that route if they want to. So yeah, I
Yeah,
think
thank you
that's
so
really
much.
cool. Yeah.
And I guess stuff I have coming up is I have a lot of workshops and talks I will be giving in 2025, as well as possibly some other projects coming to light. I guess we'll see. But yeah, you can probably find me at Mystic South again for 2025, knock on wood, hopefully. I will also be one of the presenters at the Witch Summit, and of course the OTO's conference, Noticon. I may be a part of that as well. I mean, some of these things are up in the air at this point, but if you're
Mm.
interested in coming to one of my workshops or classes, seeing what I have going on, feel free to follow me on social media or check out my YouTube channel especially.
Definitely. Okay, let's get into it. For Thelema, I want to start with a basic definition just to start us out for people that have no idea what Thelema is or what we're talking about today. Some people don't even know who Aleister Crowley is. I haven't filmed the introduction yet, but hopefully editing Ivy will put that in there that we're not necessarily talking about Crowley too much today. We have a couple questions that I want to talk to you about in terms of Crowley and how Thelemites see him. But otherwise, we're not going to be diving too deep into the man. We're mainly going into the practice of Thelema and what it means to be a Thelemite. So what is Thelema to you in your own words? I know you may not be able to speak for every Thelemite, but would love to hear just a basic definition.
Yeah, so Thelema is a philosophy, it's a religion, and it's a system of mysticism. So for individuals, it can be any combination thereof. So for someone who doesn't know anything, I've heard Thelema described as weird Buddhism, and I think that's honestly a great. It's not the worst, right?
No, that's
So
actually, yeah, I agree with that from my
so
outsider's perspective. Yeah.
So, for example, in Buddhism, there's this idea that existence itself is suffering, or called dukkha, whereas in Thelema, we sort of flip that on its head, and existence is considered to be pure joy. And so there's also this idea in Thelema that we incarnate into separateness for the chance to experience joy through union. So I mean, it's of course a whole religion and philosophy, but those are just some ideas that someone coming from a Buddhist background would quickly pick up on that, oh, okay, I see where this is coming from, but it's a little bit different. In terms of Thelema's evolution, I think the best way, I've thought about this quite a bit to explain it to someone who's never seen it before, is Thelema would be considered post-Abrahamic. So Thelema is not, would be one of the Abrahamic religions, but the thing that comes in terms of religious evolution after Islam. So Judaism, Christianity, Islam, and then Thelema in terms of that evolution. And I would say Thelema is arguably one of the most misunderstood minority religions, and a lot of that has to do with how Thelema makes use of what I would call these old Aeonic religions, religious symbols. They're different for us.
Mhm.
So off the top of my head, well, what are you talking about? Well, for example, in our system, you see a lot of 666, which, in the old Aeonic sort of Christianity, and there's all this idea around Satan and devil worship around 666. But for us, in our system, that number is related to the sun and all of the glorious things that come with the sun. So it's a solar number for us. But yeah, I think that covers a lot of sort
Yeah.
of get people's footing on track there with what it is.
I think so. It's like you said, it's a philosophy, it's a religion, it's also a practice. I mean, you have holidays that you're celebrating. So it's a full, I mean, there's central text that we're going to talk about, and we're going to talk about the culture of Thelema as well. But yeah, I really liked that, how you said it's a philosophy and a religion. One of the most central ideas, as far as I'm aware of, and correct me if I'm wrong, of course, is this concept of true will when it comes to Thelema. So there's that whole saying, I actually wrote it down, do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law. I've heard you say that many, many times. So if you can maybe elaborate on that in your own words and kind of talk about what true will is and how it sort of came about in a Thelema sense.
Yeah, so do what thou wilt should be the whole of the law is a phrase that comes from our central sacred holy text, the Book of the Law. It's a received text that's comprised of 3 separate chapters that has a great deal of depth and mysticism and all that good stuff in there. But that phrase is I would argue, central to Thelema, and it is one of the most misunderstood ones. So do what thou wilt does not mean do whatever you want. It's not a pass to just live chaotically according to your whims. It's actually quite a restrictive phrase. It's a charge and a challenge to rise up to living in accordance with your true will, and living in accordance with whatever that innermost spark of divinity is in yourself, and to only make decisions that support your divine direction or your true will, and do not make decisions that go against that. So this is obviously tied to this idea of true will, which again, I briefly explained there, but it's essentially this idea that we all have this innermost spark of divinity that if we were to align ourselves with the inertia of the universe would aid us in our going abouts in our life and during this incarnation. So when we talk about do what thou wilt, it's, I guess, in some sense, kind of a strange way to think about it, but it's quite restrictive. And so a lot of the path and a lot of the challenge of being a Thelemite is to discover your true will, and then once you discover it, use the tools and the mysticism um, to do it once you know it.
Yeah, it's not necessarily doing whatever you want in the sense of going on a drunken bender every single night
Mhm.
and fucking off and doing whatever. There's a little
Yeah.
bit more, I guess, enlightened actions that go with it. I think I can't remember if I was having this conversation with you or not. I think it was either you or oh gosh, it was somebody. It was somebody that I know was a Thelemite. I think it was you, let me know. But I was having a conversation about true will and kind of identifying what even is your true will? How do you find it? I know that's probably a question that's always asked by beginners. And I had this story as it pertains to my own life, which I won't monologue into that whole thing, but I basically had two paths presented to me,
Mhm.
and one I had to work really, really, really hard for, and it felt like I was going against the grain of the universe, and I couldn't understand if maybe I was going against what my ultimate true will should have been, or the other path was just so easy. It was so I could have done it effortlessly, and both honestly would have led me to very successful places, just two completely different ways of living my life. So it is kind of like this internal battle of identifying what is your true will and what is not. At what point do I need to just push through and have more discipline? Or at what point do I need to actually stop and listen to the universe? Maybe there's a reason why one path feels a little bit more effortless. But again, like going back to that idea of true will, obviously it's not just about fucking off and doing whatever. So my question for you is, how do you see this playing out in your own life? You don't have to get too personal, but
Yeah, yeah.
true will, I mean, how do you relate to that to your practice?
Yeah, so well, it's sort of central to everything I do, but I really liked your example there. And I'll provide another one, for example. So I certainly enjoy video games, and like anyone else, I enjoy a good drink. But whether sugary caloric bubble tea drink or alcoholic, I'm a Taurus through and through. So I enjoy some indulgences in life. But, for example, if I had a really important interview the next day and it was very important to me to do my will to, for example, if this was a career choice in accordance with how I understood my true will, I'd want to do very good on that interview. And I would not, despite having urges to stay up all night playing video games and drinking alcohol, and just getting blasted, and then waking up the next day hungover and tired and not slept and looking ragged. That would not be in accordance with my will, right? So,
Mhm.
despite my impulse to have fun in the moment, perhaps I would make a more responsible choice to go to sleep early, be well rested, not overindulge. But I guess the question then is, how does one go about knowing their true will? And
Right.
there's infinite systems out there. Within Thelema, the one laid out by Aleister Crowley, he proposes understanding it through the Kabbalistic tree of life, which is usually represented by 10 circular emanations or sephiroth. I have a picture for people who have never seen this before. So that is one interpretation of the Kabbalistic tree of life. You can see the Sephiroth here, and then there are 22 paths on the tree of life as well. So what is this thing? This is, one can understand it to be the way of the return back to the divine. We're down here in Malkuth, the material world, and you would travel up this way of the return towards divinity, towards God, towards the absolute all. People also understand this to be the mind of God, the way of return, all of that good stuff. So the idea within Thelemic mysticism, and again, there's a lot of different ways to go about this, but within that particular system that Crowley laid out, the idea is to move from down here in Malkuth up eventually to Kether. And when we're talking about knowing our true will, that directly involves right here Tiferet, getting
Mhm.
to this stage. So this particular Sephira is associated with the sun, also beauty and knowledge, but within Thelema, it's associated with this thing called knowledge and conversation of the Holy Guardian Angel, or K and C. And so this idea to make this union with your holy guardian angel to not only realize it, but also work on yourself as a space that you can properly accept that divine light, and to have that marriage essentially with your holy guardian angel is one way you understand your true will. So before you get to that place at Tiferet, with that union and that marriage with your HGA, you may have a vague notion of your true will. Some people, especially David Shoemaker, talks about the HGA communicating to you through your dreams, for example, but perhaps you understand it in a more muddled way. But post KNC, that knowledge and conversation of your true will becomes more clear, and thus the work continues up that. So in my case, that looks like maintaining my physical health as well as my spiritual health by daily work. I do a lot of yoga, actually, and more traditional yoga, the 8 limbs of yoga, not necessarily entirely the postural yoga that people associate in the West, but that's a huge part of my practice. But also daily practice of various rituals like saying will before my main meals of the day, doing Liber Resh Vel Helios, which is a solar adoration. So stuff like that maintains and fortifies myself so I can be an efficient magician undergoing this mystical work.
Yeah, well, you brought up the Holy Guardian Angel, which was actually something that I wanted to talk about next. And I appreciate you bringing up very specific rituals like saying will, because you actually did that at Mystic South when
Yeah.
we had lunch together. I got to witness her do one of her rituals, and it was really, really cool to see. So I appreciate you bringing up those practical applications. But the Holy Guardian Angel is something, again, correct me if I'm wrong, is very central to Thelema as well. So, and I know there's a relation between finding someone's true will or following along that path and also working with the Holy Guardian Angel. So can you elaborate a little bit more on what the Holy Guardian Angel is, and then also how that kind of intertwines with true will?
Yeah, so a lot of people have different understandings of the Holy Guardian Angel. So some people understand it to be a part of your subconscious or your conscious mind that you come to realize and integrate more thoroughly. Other people interpret it as something more external to yourself that you make space for and then thus incorporate into your person. Regardless of how you interpret that divine spark, it is understood to be something that we all have. In order for the universal will, in order for the universe to, I don't know, turn like a well-oiled machine, all of its parts must be doing their own separate wills according to that divine nature. And then once that's happening, things are no longer in friction, but, moving much more smoothly in harmony, and in balance.
Sure. What are some rituals that someone could do to get in touch with their holy guardian angel? Obviously, you don't have to go into the intricacies, but just curious about the rituals for that.
Yeah, so some of the classic rituals for the Holy Guardian Angel are, of course, the Abramelin. That's what I think a lot of magicians would immediately associate with that.
Right.
And then there's Crowley's version of it, which you're also able to do. But, Crowley said it himself that his way isn't the only way to come to knowledge and conversation of the Holy Guardian Angel. There's so many different paths out there and ways to do it. Crowley took a lot of very detailed notes, as well as our other Thelemic, teachers and various personalities throughout history, not just Crowley, but a lot of people before me, including Jane Wolfe and Phyllis Seckler and those amazing women. But yeah, it's not the only way. It is a way though, so if you're looking for inspiration, especially with journaling, there's some great stuff in there to help you along your path. So yeah, I mean, if you're doing the Abramelin, if you're doing Liber Samekh, which is Crowley's version essentially of the the Abramelin, yeah, that's fine. Also, you may want to, perhaps check out a system like the AA, which is it's an initiatory order. It's Aleister Crowley's teaching order that he established. It's within the lineage of the Golden Dawn. It's just much more fast-paced with a Thelemic focus. And then there's also a lot of Thelemic schools out there. So there's College of Thelema, involved with Jim Eshelman, and then there's Temple of the Silver Star with David Shoemaker. So those are just some examples of orders as well, initiatory orders that can also help you with your studies.
Definitely. Thank you for sharing those. You definitely didn't
Yeah.
have to, but I appreciate that you just had that on the top of your head ready to throw out. So
I'm
that's
glad it was helpful. I You're asking such good questions, and I just want to make sure I'm giving good information for people.
Definitely. And obviously, I mean, this is a more casual conversation too.
Mhm.
If people really want to learn about the practice, at the end, we're going to talk about books that you would recommend and such,
Oh
other
yeah,
resources. So, if somebody's interested in this, please go read the actual books. This is more of a casual conversation about it. So, no pressure on you to provide all of the
thank you.
information necessary for every
Yeah.
single question. But you did bring up Crowley. So, I want to pivot to him a little bit. And again, we're not
All
really
right.
going to deep dive into Crowley in this conversation because I have someone else I'm going to be discussing that with. But with Crowley, I know that there's going to be a question that people need answers to, that they want
Yeah.
answers to. And the question is, do Thelemites worship Crowley? And if they do, what does that look like? If they don't, how do they see Crowley in the context of the religion of Thelema?
Well, I just want to say emphatically, Thelemites do not worship Crowley. Um, Crowley is viewed a lot of different ways by different Thelemites. Thelemites are, again, as diverse as any other group of people out there. Some people love him, some people hate him, everything in between and outside of that. I've come to understand him as an incredibly valuable historical figure who had some issues going on with him, but the body of work he produced and the tools he made and his works, both in writing and poetry, but also the mystical and the magical element, so outside of the mundane world, are profoundly valuable, especially to marginalized people. And that's kind of the irony of some of the outrage I see from the pagan and the witchcraft community who have no idea who Crowley is, what Thelema is they think that, oh, he's just another problematic dude, when in reality, the people they champion, like some of the original Golden Dawn members, again, they don't understand the history, are incredibly racist, homophobic. And the reason some of these historic magicians hated Crowley was the fact that he was a bisexual, polyamorous, kinky, and what we would understand in the modern language, genderqueer person. Crowley, for a while, even went by the name Alice, and used she, her pronouns. Crowley was openly bisexual and polyamorous at a time you just weren't. People in his era, in the Victorian era, were being arrested and sent to jail for homosexual relations. But Crowley just went and did his thing loudly and proudly. And boy, did the Victorian society not like that.
Sure.
From day one in his orders, his various groups he started, fraternal as well as educational and all that stuff, he included women. He included people from all races, all backgrounds. Did the guy occasionally say some weird stuff in his journal? Yeah, sure. But who hasn't? His journals were private and now they've been published. He's very much a human, and we as Thelemites, we don't seek to be Crowley in the way Christians seek to be Jesus. Not at all. We view him as more like this weird friend that has given us a lot of valuable gifts, but he's a little sketchy sometimes. I would argue a lot of the issues, and let me just say this for everyone else listening. Almost everything you've probably heard about Crowley is a complete fabrication, a lie, all of that stuff. The tabloids really did him dirty at a time when he was completely penniless, sort of living his spiritual truth, giving up, his worldly possessions and kind of teaching and publishing and doing all of this basically for free.
Yeah.
His main teaching order, the AA, is not something that takes money from you. It's free. But yeah, so Crowley really believed in that, and he didn't want people to accuse him of being a grifter and like doing this for money. So yeah, he ended up pretty broke because of that. But he believed in it, and he lived by his values. So, a lot of these tabloids came out at a time where he couldn't hire litigation and be like, hey, you're just straight up lying about me, because he was so penniless. So yeah, there's a lot of really gross things people think Crowley did, which is just not true. And then, putting Crowley aside for a second, another thing that has happened since the Victorian era, which has happened systematically to all voices in our magical communities, regardless of what they are, is the voices of women and other marginalized folks have been erased. In the case of Thelema, from its very inception, women were involved. No one talks about them, but Thelema would not exist without women. And let me just start by saying the Book of the Law, our central sacred holy text, exists because of Rose. Crowley's first wife. So she is
Yeah.
the reason. She sort of was the spark which got the ball rolling. She was not super into the occult like Crowley, but it was through her, I'll just say, urging and creativity that sort of pushed Crowley to receive the Book of the Law. And then from there was just amazing women all throughout it. The Thoth Tarot
I was just
exists
about to
because
bring
of,
that up. Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
Go
So
ahead.
so there's different, for people who don't know, there's different systems of tarot. And the second most popular one, second to Rider-Waite-Smith, which a lot of people are familiar with, is actually the Thoth Tarot, which is
Mm.
very similar to the Rider-Waite-Smith, but there's just a few key differences. And the woman who realized that project and was Frida Harris, who was an amazing artist, and she got the art, she got the spirit, she had the inspiration for the project, but she needed some help with the magic part, and so she actually got Crowley to help her with the magic part to help her understand that. So yeah, she gets erased. Jane Wolfe, who was there, all along Crowley's side, doing the AA, keeping that current alive, to then from her, Phyllis Seckler, both amazing, strong women who embodied Thelema and gave us a lot of what we have today.
I love that you brought up the women that were erased. That was actually not something that I had down here, but I'm so glad you brought it up because I forgot that we have had these conversations before. In private, we've talked about that. And when I attended your Thoth Tarot workshop, I didn't even realize that there was a woman completely erased from that. That was incredible to hear
Mhm.
about, and that it wasn't just Crowley's creation. So yeah, it's really sad to see the occult women, the women in occult that have been erased from that. So
Absolutely.
thank you for bringing that up. I
Yeah.
wanted to ask you too, because I know we're going to go to central texts of Thelema, and there's
Oh
like a
yeah.
lot there. We're definitely getting into that. There's so many, but just for you personally, when it
Yeah.
comes to, what Thelema means to you personally and also his writings,
Mm.
what are some writings from Crowley that you really personally resonate with? Like, is there a particular book, a particular passage? And again, you don't have to get too personal, but I'm just curious what your favorites are of what he's written.
I guess I'll sort of separate. So in terms of channel texts from like Crowley's occult work, the two that resonate with me the most are going to be The Vision and the Voice and the Book of the Law. So The Vision and the Voice was Crowley scrying the 30 Enochian Aethers. So that Enochian system, for those who don't know, goes back to this occultist by the name of John Dee, and it deals with what he believed were these Enochian angels, Enochian angels, and the Aethers are sort of like these concentric shells that you move through. So you start at the one closest to Earth, 30, and then you move up. Well, that's the traditional idea behind it. So Crowley, basically part of his work was to scry these aethers and to get to make contact and to go. You can understand it to be like an initiatory journey almost, and that's what Crowley was getting out of it. It reflected his initiatory journey, scrying these aethers. And there's some absolutely profound and beautiful things that came from that. And it's sort of fun to read that particular text. And just FYI for people, it is free and on the internet. You can go to websites like Sacred Text and
Mm.
read it. But it's fun to tease out what was specific for like Crowley's personal initiatory journey and what was more like a message for everyone, for all of humanity. And the thing I guess I want to emphasize the most out of these particular channel texts is how empowering they are. And that's ultimately, as a queer person myself, what I wanted and needed and what I've gotten out of Thelema and all of these works is how beautifully human and empowering, and I don't know, just giving you a place to understand yourself from love and acceptance. Echoed throughout this understanding of the divine is that as humans, we are divine not in spite of our humanity, but because of it. And I just think that's so beautiful. And I think a lot of marginalized people can really get a lot out of that understanding of divinity and ourselves. Oh yeah, and then my second one I mentioned is, of course, the channeled Book of the Law. Absolutely amazing text. For one of the Thelemic holidays, which I will talk about later, I read it every year. for the 3 days of the writing of the Book of the Law. And also, as a side note, for non-Thelemites, and if you were going to read some of our holy books randomly, those are actually the two I'm going to tell you to read. I think you'll get the most out of it. And if you need more of an urging to do that, Esoterica YouTube channel, I was talking to Justin Sledge. I think his favorite text out of those is The Vision and the Voice. So.
Thank you for sharing that. I'm just curious if you would be open to sharing your journey into Thelema, because I know the first collaboration we did, you shared your story just briefly, but I was hoping that you could share that again and what it means to you to be a Thelemite and how you even found yourself in this in the first place.
Yeah, so my journey begins many, many years ago when I was just a young preteen or teenager, and I was living in Florida where I grew up, and I was very bookish, very introverted, bookish kid, like I think a lot of us can relate to. And conservative policies around that time recently decided to remove a ton of what they viewed as negative, harmful, controversial books from both the public library as well as my school's library. So that was books that had any mention of evolution, those were removed, and I was into science, so that sucks. Any books that had any mention of anything LGBT, including gay characters, even if the whole theme wasn't LGBT, those were removed. So as, again, someone who was questioning myself and trying to understand myself and the world, that was a challenge. So ultimately, what was left? Well, after the big purge, if you will, you had kids' books like Clifford the Big Red Dog, which I wasn't inclined to read again. And
Sure.
then there was a bunch of philosophy books, so, Heidegger, Camus, Sartre, all of that good stuff. And I actually started out with the existentialist, and I didn't understand it at first as like a middle school, high schooler, that sucks. But I was bored, and this was like pre-internet times, when the internet was not what it is today. So you couldn't just get lost in like TikTok scrolling to waste time. All I had was like these dense philosophy books, so I just started reading them and then rereading them and then rereading them. And eventually, little old me decided to start a blog to kind of connect with people back when LiveJournal was a thing, and then MySpace,
Yeah.
and connect with like minds. It was around that time I first identified as an occultist, and sort of connected with similar people and similar minds, and then fast forward to college, I got involved in the free thought movement, and also a huge part of my story is political activism. I was involved in the peace protests for the war in Iraq, like all of that stuff. But yeah, that kind of continued into college era. I was actually the president of the free thought organization at my college for many years, for 2 years. And yeah, I eventually put down sort of my studies of the occult, to do life, go to grad school and all of that. But then, it seemed like the right point in my life, from corporate burnout and my work to pick it back up. And
Yeah.
and I decided to give, well, let me just say this. I was very burnt out, through my choice of corporate work, from grad school. I was very, very burnt out, and I just felt lost. I felt hollowed out. And so I decided, after trying like everything to kind of find my spark again and figure out what I should do career-wise, I decided to return back to this guy named Aleister Crowley. He seemed like kind of a weirdo, and his idea of true will. And I was like, well, what do I have to lose? I might as well give this weird stuff a shot. And wow, to my surprise, about a year into my thorough practice, and study, my world was just shaken. So I sought to know my will so that I could do it, and boy, did I get so much more. And I will say this as a caution for people wanting to get a little bit further and actually practice this. If you want to know your will and start this mysticism, once you're on the path, there's no going off the path, and that will most likely shake up everything about your world. So you may find yourself moving, you may find yourself divorcing, you may find yourself doing all kinds of stuff, different from your current life. So I tell people, if you're happy with your current life and everything's going well, perhaps don't start this work, don't start this mysticism. You can obviously still be a Thelemite. This is actually a good distinction to make here, perhaps.
Sure.
So we like to say the law is for all, but the great work is not. So what does that mean? Well, the law of Thelema is, you know, how we understand the current aeon we're living in. And there's a lot of like, doing your will and all this, we consider this era to be one of liberation, freedom, sexual and otherwise, to live and dress and live as thou wilt. That applies to everyone. But this great work to return to the divine, to work with the tree of life kind of stuff, the big, hard, mystic work, that's not for everyone and it's not for every lifetime. So, and that's completely valid too. So you don't have to join, well, I was going to talk about this later, but yeah, you don't have to join any Thelemic orders or like go take a deep dive into anything in order to be a Thelemite or even benefit from some of our stuff. You can just borrow little bits and pieces of our rituals and make them part of your life. But yeah, I'm getting off track from like my life. Yeah, so
No, this is
um,
great.
after that big revelation and all that stuff, I was like, well, yeah, there's a huge gap in terms of voices online and in terms of writing. Historically, women were less likely to be published, so we don't have a lot of works from women in the occult and ceremonial magic as much as we do for men. And also just like representation, right? So I was like, someone should do this. Someone should make a YouTube channel. Someone should elevate like other voices other than old men. And
So true.
and I was like, oh shoot, that's me. Instead of telling someone they should do that work, I should deal with it and do that work. I'm
Don't you
sure you
hate
can
that?
relate,
No.
Ivy. I'm sure you can relate.
Yes, when you're looking around, you're like, wow, there's a gap that needs to be filled. Is someone going to do this? And then you look around, you're like, oh, that's me, isn't it? I
Yeah.
have to be the one to do it. And of course, we don't want to, but no, I think you're doing incredible work.
Thank you. You are too. I
Oh, thank you.
absolutely love what you're doing. You bring such a fresh perspective to things, and I think your
Oh, thank
audience
you.
knows that. I mean, you bring a fresh perspective, you bring intelligent explorations of things, but also creative. I mean, I think
Thank
there's
you.
room for everyone to bring their own unique twist, and I love seeing what you're doing. So,
Thank you.
yeah, so that was how I kind of ended up here.
Yeah, I mean, I love that you brought up the great work too, because even in my own chaos magic practice, the way I practice chaos magic, I think is a little bit different. Well, all chaots, we're all different from each other, right? We're not, we're definitely not the same. But I
Mhm.
incorporate the idea of the great work into my practice as well from a chaos magic perspective. And I
Sure.
know not all chaots do that, but it's a very alchemical process when it comes to deconditioning my mind and removing brainwashing and kind of uncovering what my
Mm.
true will actually is through that process. And I know that's a little bit mixing. After our conversations, I'm starting to realize I am so in alignment with Thelema's values and overall
Yeah.
goals than I ever realized. Whenever you talk, I'm like, oh, I'm already doing that in my own chaos magic practice. There's definitely a parallel between chaos magic and Thelema, definitely
Mhm.
with the radical ideas and such. So going back to Thelema as a religion, I want to talk a little bit more about like the holidays, the holy days that you celebrate. I want to talk about sacred and central texts. So I know there's a really long laundry list of central texts, but if you can just kind of go over, the highlights, give us the highlights, if you will.
Yeah, so I'm gonna actually pull this book out, which we're gonna talk about recommended books later, but here's a fantastic book. So this is the Weiser Concise Guide to Aleister Crowley. It's just a thin little thing, and in it is actually a list of our holy texts. So they are understood to be Class A documents. So in Thelema, we have Class A, Class AB, Class B, Class C documents. So
Oh my
Class A.
gosh. Sorry. That's so many. I love it. Keep going. Sorry.
So Class A documents are those understood to be sort of directly from a divine source, that are not able to be changed to the letter, right? So like there's mysteries hidden within the letters themselves, um, and the way it's said and all of that meant for people to unpack for themselves. And the best way to understand Thelemic holy texts is, unlike something like in Christianity where you understand the divine like through like, oh, your priest's interpretation of it or whatever, this is an invitation for you to jump right into it yourself and explore not only yourself and understand yourself, but also the works on your own. So the best gift you can give yourself is to go ahead and read them on your own and interpret them on your own. Now, that being said, so it's a little bit debatable whether the Tunis Comet is Class A, but what is the Tunis Comet? The Tunis Comet is this, so the Book of the Law was channeled, and then later Crowley went back and then added this comment at the end. He said, you are meant to interpret this Book of the Law according to yourself with reference to my commentary. What are Crowley's comments? The best way to understand the Book of the Law is with this book called The Laws for All. And it is literally Crowley unpacking what some of this weird stuff is. Now, he was the messenger, he is not the message. So even he did not understand all of it, and he didn't explain all of it. But if you are trying to unravel the Book of the Law, for example, check out Crowley's commentaries on that through The Laws for All. And if you just want a little taste, this is a fantastic thing to check out.
I'll put it in the description box too, especially when we talk about, all the
Yeah.
books that you would recommend for beginners and resources and such, because yeah, there is a lot. And wasn't there a story? Okay, so I am vaguely familiar with the writing of the Book of the Law, because didn't Aleister Crowley, he went to Egypt, he brought his wife, and then he ended up writing the book within like 3 days or something like
Yes.
that. Okay, do you remember that story off the top of your head? Of course you do, because you're a
Yeah,
Thelemite.
I'm more than
Would you
happy
be
to
able to
share
share
that
that?
story.
I
Yeah.
would love to hear
Uh,
it.
yeah. Okay, so I'm gonna actually start before Egypt because I think this part is amazing and it
Okay,
focuses more on Rose Edith Kelly, who would
love it.
soon become Rose Kelly. So she was actually a divorced woman, and she was a wild child. She was not a normal Victorian proper lady. So one of the stories that was told about her, and she told, was how she came from a well-to-do background and all of that, and they wanted her to marry well and do all of that. But when she was widowed, especially, she was kind of still a bit wild, and she claimed, well, her parents understood that she was seeing a lot of men, romantically, sexually, or otherwise, just kind of going wild. And we would say in her hoe phase.
Love it.
And one of the things she told her parents was that she was pregnant out of wedlock, and they were scandalized by that. She also said she didn't know what to do there, and so her parents like, oh my gosh, this is terrible. We can't keep it hush hush, and so they gave her money for an abortion. She was never pregnant. That was a lie. She used that money to go buy dresses she wanted.
Love that.
So that was Rose. So she's out here living wild, and so her parents like, okay, whoa. Out of the two dudes you're marrying, we are going to make you marry this particular dude and just be done with it. Like she was breaking hearts left and right. Like suitors were coming around. She'd be like, nah, I'm good for sex, but like I don't want to marry you. And her parents like, absolutely not. You're going to marry at least one of these dudes you're fooling around with because this is out of control. And she's like, oh, I hate this. Well, it just so happened her brother was friends with Aleister Crowley through college. And so Crowley's estate, which was at the time Boleskine, was pretty close to Rose's, and so close, I mean. But anyway, Crowley was just hanging out with his friend, and then Rose was there, and she's like, I got this problem, my family's making me marry this random guy. Well, he wasn't too random, but she's like, I don't want to marry him. I want to be free, and I want to continue to live as I want. Like, I don't want all of this crap put on me. And Crowley's like, why don't you just marry me? I don't really know who you are, but you can do whatever you want. I'm not interested in controlling you. Which, fun fact about Crowley too, he, being very free-spirited himself, always encouraged his partners to be equally free-spirited and polyamorous. He was never like, just date me, I'm a toxic dom. That's not
Sure.
Crowley at all. He was yeah, do whatever you want. So he's like, sure, why not? Let's make it happen. I don't know you, you don't know me. Let's just get married and see what happens. So he does. She's like, cool. So kind of wild. Both of them were pretty, ballsy for marrying each other, marrying two strangers. And so
Yeah.
eventually they went on this honeymoon, and the remarkable thing about the story of Aleister Crowley and Rose, they fell in love, actually. So they went from being strangers, marrying, and then falling deeply in love and having this incredible connection. And for their honeymoon, they went to Egypt. They stayed at the base of the Great Pyramid, which in that time you could do that. And I guess you can if you're Mr. Beast, which that's interesting. I heard
Hmm.
he rented the pyramids for a video or something, and
Are
he
you
stayed in them.
serious? Oh wow, I didn't
Yes.
know that. That's crazy.
So I guess if you have enough money and fame, you can do that now.
Sure.
But it was more common for just like normal folks like Crowley to just rent the pyramid and stay in the base. Okay, so he's staying in there, and he really wants to impress her, even though she's not into this occult stuff at all. But he's like, I've been practicing this magic stuff with the Golden Dawn. I'm going to do an invocation of the air sylphs, which are these
Mhm.
air spirits, elemental spirits. Um, or was it an evocation? Well, anyway, so he does this ritual for the sylphs, and he tries to make them appear, and she doesn't see anything. She's like, I don't see anything. You're just doing some weird stuff at the base of the pyramid, trying to impress me, but I'm not really impressed. Like Crowley, this is kind of weird. However, after that ritual, she's like, wait, I'm getting a message. And he's like, what are you talking about? She's like, I'm getting a message from Horus that you need to contact him um, by this method. And he's like, I don't believe you. How do you know who Horus is? You're not into any of this. And so she then starts to describe a whole bunch of qualities of Horus. And then Crowley kind of tests her on that. And then another part of this sort of like trying to figure out if she's just like bullshitting him, he takes her to a museum and he's like, okay, we're in a museum. Point out which God is trying to talk to you. And she goes right up to this stele and she points at it and she points out Horus. And the interesting thing was that particular stele display in the museum was labeled 666, which within the Golden Dawn system, as well as the Thelemic system, that is against a solar number associated with the sun, associated with Horus, but also comes right out of Crowley's childhood because he grew up in a fundamentalist Christian household, this group called the Plymouth Brethren.
Mhm.
And within this group, his mother was obviously very into the Bible, very into these apocalyptic revelations. And when Crowley was bad, she would call him the Beast, which to her had like the Christian Bible meaning.
Yeah.
But to him, he eventually embraced it and kind of reclaimed that derogatory nickname. And he's like, yeah, heck yeah, I'm the Beast. I'm the solar beast, so he had a very different understanding of the Beast, and it would eventually factor into Thelema in particular, but he's like, wow, that's wild. So like my name is on it, like 666, and there's Horus. So Crowley then went and wrote a long ritual to invoke Horus with inspiration from what Rose was urging and sort of her ideas. And then he sat down, and at noon, over the course of the next 3 days, he channeled a chapter of the Book of the Law. So making 3 chapters of this channeled text. And at the time, it was just another weird thing he did, okay? So he just like took
Sure.
this book and just like tossed it somewhere, forgot it. And it wasn't until much later that he realized, wow, this is actually something. And then the really weird thing about it is those chapters reflect the stele he originally saw in the museum. So it kind of tells like this like tight-knit story. And then so someone might be like, oh wow, that's a bunch of stuff happening. Like, so you mean Thelemites worship Egyptian deities? No. And this is hard to talk about to people who are not occultists, or people who live like a more mundane kind of understanding of things.
Mm.
So of course you're always free to interpret anything anywhere as you like, but I think something to keep in mind is that even the Horus that appeared to Rose is perhaps its own separate thing from the actual Egyptian gods. So when spirits appear, when the divine speaks to you, however you understand it to be, it's speaking to you as a human. And as humans, we have a limited set of symbols and symbols around us in our environment, right? So if you can't speak Greek fluently, a spirit's not going to probably talk to you in Greek. That's just
Right.
not going to happen. If you don't speak Spanish fluently, you're not going to channel a text in Spanish. Your keyboard's lacking those keys.
Yes, yes.
So, of course, Crowley, having been through the Golden Dawn system, familiar with Egyptian, mythology and all of this, and actually physically being in Egypt when the text was received, those spirits or that source of divinity picked up on what was available. That was the keyboard they had to deliver this divine message. So
Mhm.
you'll notice that there's some Christian symbols. It's very King Jamesian language, and that has to do with Crowley's background, right? So he grew up reading the Bible again and again and again in his fundamentalist Christian background. So the way Crowley writes and like channels text through the Crowley brain comes out like that. And the symbols are Egyptian, right? Because that's what was there. So if this book was received in Norway, it would look a lot different. But it was received in Egypt, so that's what that is. So it is not the worship or appropriation of Egyptian deities, but simply divinity itself using these symbols in this particular way.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, I really like your analogy of the keyboard and not having the right keys because that just reflects on spirit work in general outside of
yeah.
Thelema. I mean, they're going to really communicate to you how you can receive that message. And to what you said earlier about the Book of the Law, because the Book of the Law is one of the, biggest central texts for Thelema,
Mhm.
you mentioned how everyone's going to interpret it a little bit differently. And I think you've even mentioned before that it's not an easy read. It's not something
No.
that you just breeze through, that it's something that's heavy with metaphors, I'm assuming, or just kind of difficult to get through and something you need to contemplate. It reminds me of in my book club, we're reading Meditations by Marcus Aurelius. And it
Oh,
reminds
cool.
me of that because first of all, it's a fantastic book to do bibliomancy with. But then second of all, every sentence you have to sit with yourself and really digest it. And the Book of the
Mhm.
Law kind of reminds me of that a little bit. I'm sure that you have to digest each sentence and go slowly with it.
Oh yeah, absolutely. It's a lifetime work to understand, honestly.
Yeah, that's what I've heard at least. I have not read it myself, but that's what I've heard. So can you talk a little bit about the holidays or holy
Yeah.
days that you celebrate? Because this is a religion, so I would love to hear about it. Tell me all the things.
Yeah. So I am so excited to talk about this. So people often conflate our holy days or holidays with the Wiccan Wheel of the Year, and I feel like even every pagan or witchcraft space is you look up like, oh, what's there to celebrate, and then it's like the Wiccan Wheel of the Year, which is a very specific thing made by Gerald Gardner. So I think a lot of people would understand not every witch, not every occultist or magician or whatever practices with the Wheel of the Year. It's not necessarily applicable to them in their path. And so not only is it not necessarily applicable to Thelema, it's not what we use. So we have holy days throughout the year. And these predate Gerald Gardner. So Gerald Gardner probably borrowed, I mean, we know he borrowed a ton from Crowley, like an absolute ton from his diaries, like word for word. And that's kind of got filtered and changed over time. But there's been studies, you can go research them and stuff if people are interested in the exact numbers, but it's quite astounding. And so you could argue that perhaps the Wiccan Wheel of the Year is built with parts of our Thelemic holy days, but there are some key differences. So one of the kind of similarities is we do celebrate the solstices and the equinoxes.
Mhm.
So those are understood in a Wiccan sense, different than we do. But yeah, we do have those going on. And then we do have some unique holidays to Thelema. So we have a big one, which is the 3 days of the writing of the Book of the Law. So that's like a 3-day holiday. And then we also have the first night of the prophet and his bride. That is a holiday unique to Thelema. And then we also celebrate like around the spring equinox, the equinox of the gods, and the supreme ritual. So that's that story I just told you
Mhm.
about. So the equinox of the gods is like this point of in which the gods kind of changed hands from the old Aeonic Osiris formula of like death and suffering to get to enlightenment, to joy and pleasure as a way to perhaps get to enlightenment. And
Yeah.
wasn't the best explanation there, but it's what my brain had in it at the moment.
No, that
So
was great. That was great.
um, and then we also have additional temporal observances through time. So we have things like a feast for fire and a feast for water, which are these celebrations going through puberty. And then we have a feast for Tahuti and the child of the prophet. And by the way, for people who are wondering, these all come out of the Book of the Law. So like when this holy text was received, it's like, here are the holy days, and it's like listed all there. So and you know, as time goes on, there's a lot of you know, local celebrations and customs that have come up organically around various times of the year. But the ones I just listed are the official ones. So
Yeah.
officially, we don't celebrate the cross quarters like the Wiccan Wheel of the Year does.
Right, right. Thank you for making that distinction. I think everyone comes into the occult community thinking everybody celebrates the Wiccan Wheel of the Year, and some people don't even know that the Wheel of the Year is Wiccan. So I appreciate you
Mhm.
making that distinction.
Absolutely. It's a
Yeah.
good conversation. Thanks for bringing it up.
Yeah, of course. I mean, so as far as ceremonies go, not just holidays, but there are specific ceremonies, there are specific rituals. I was hoping you could talk about what kind of rituals you do in your practice and kind of how those look. Because I know there's Liber Resh, right? That's the solar
Mhm.
adoration one, saying
Yes.
will, and then there's, of course, Gnostic Mass if you go to your local
Mhm.
OTO body. So anything that you want to share regarding that? I know it's a wide topic, but whatever you feel like talking about.
Yeah, absolutely. So I sort of break this up into categories of like what my practice looks daily versus like maybe monthly versus like over years.
Mhm.
So daily in a perfect world, I would perform Liber Resh Vel Helios, like you just said, this thing called Liber Resh, 4 times a day. It's a solar adoration. I teach this thing a lot, especially in witchcraft spaces, because a lot of people are familiar with moon magic and like sort of aligning themselves with the moon, and you get a really different energy when you work with the sun.
Oh, for sure.
And I think it's for people who are interested in trying something new and doing something with the sun. I think Liber Resh is a great ritual to try out and see how that feels. And if you want an example of how to do that visually and an explanation of all the parts, I have a whole instructional video on YouTube. It's basically like a course. You could just sit down and then like watch me do it and like actually go and do it yourself. So I make sure to have like a full demonstration of me doing Resh at all 4 times of the day for people who are visual learners. It's fantastic. So that's going on. And I also do, I say will, which you witnessed. Typically, Thelemites say will over the main meal of the day. I
Mhm.
typically ate 2 main meals, lunch and dinner, so I say will twice. That's my own personal quirk. Another great thing that a lot of Thelemites do, as well as myself, in an ideal world daily, is when you wake up, do the lesser banishing ritual of the pentagram, and then before you go to sleep, do a version of that, which is, you know, the lesser banishing ritual of the pentagram as well. So you may want to do like the invoking pentagrams in the morning and then
Mhm.
banishing pentagrams in the evening. So yeah, that's a thing. Right now, I am probably more like on a monthly time frame, scrying the Enochian Aethers, so that's part of my initiatory journey at the moment. And of course, you don't have to be in any magical orders or initiated to be a Thelemite. I think I mentioned that, but for me,
Mhm.
I am in this fraternity. It's a paramasonic fraternity, which doesn't mean much to people, but that's the technical term of what it is. But it's, yeah, a magical fraternity, and I do stuff with that. Occasionally, so like the Gnostic Mass, for example, when I have an opportunity to do that, participate in initiations, go through initiations myself. Those happen whenever they happen. Um, yeah, I'm sure I'm forgetting things, but
That was a
that gives
lot
sort of
though.
a
Yeah.
perspective of like what my world looks like, and that's of course going to be different depending on the person, but that's sort of what I'm dealing with right now.
Yes, it's so beautiful to hear about your practices of what
Oh.
Thelema is versus what it isn't, because
Mm,
I'm so tired of people judging things that they don't know anything about or haven't taken the time to research. Because I know immediately people are going to say, "Oh, Aleister Crowley was the wickedest man alive," and they're going to
mhm,
immediately, demonize Thelema. And it's just so beautiful to hear about what you actually do, and also the fact that
mm.
you brought up women in the occult spaces that have been erased, and women do have a role, like a big role in Thelema. So thank you
Yeah,
for giving
absolutely.
your insight in on that. So let's pivot to there's some culture questions that I wanted to ask you about the community as a whole, kind of where it's at today, because
Mm.
obviously Thelema's been going on for a while now. So how would you describe the evolution of the community, and do you feel like it's a lot more inclusive today? I want to talk about a little bit more spicy questions in terms of
Yeah.
that. So do you think it's gotten a lot better as far as like the stigma?
Yeah, let's talk. I think those are both great things to bring up. And so I guess to answer the community overall question and then kind of get more specific,
Sure.
um, Thelema is a minority religion, a very, very small religion, especially compared to something like Wicca or something else. But that being said, it's very individualistic in the sense that we have a lot of solo practitioners. We have people who aren't in any magical orders, who do their own thing. I don't have numbers to give you, and it's hard to know how many Thelemites exist because there's no way to keep track of all of us. But yeah, it is a really small community. You know, you get a sense of everyone knowing everyone else. I've been a solo practitioner basically my whole life. That's the world I come from. So this idea of trying to interact with other similar people with similar beliefs is new to me. But yeah, it's a thing that you can do. I
Great.
mean, every community, every organization has the pitfall of humanity being humans, right? So,
Right.
it's every opportunity to interact with a person is there's a cost associated with it, and
Right.
sometimes that cost is going to disrupt your life more than others. But yeah, it's a thing you can be a part of.
Sure.
There's a lot of different organizations. The two big ones are the AA, which is Aleister Crowley's teaching order he established. That's from the Golden Dawn lineage, and then he sort of was Crowley was not the founder of OTO or
Mm.
Ordo Templi Orientis, but he was an influential member of that fraternity, which you know other heads of the order have also further influenced it since Crowley, so it's not the same order that existed back in Crowley's day in the rituals and everything. But just like Freemasonry, they offer initiations and, that kind of experience. And it's an opportunity for growth and fraternity and learning in a different way, just like with all Masonry. And the difference, though, with the OTO is they do offer a lot of public rituals. So you don't have to join the order, for example, to come to our Gnostic Mass and experience that ritual if you want. So get a taste of that, which is a really cool energy as well and something different. If someone is nearby an OTO body and wants to experience the Gnostic Mass, that's a good opportunity to try something different. And I think I started talking about what you asked me, but please refresh my memory.
Oh, we were just talking about the Thelema community, where it's at today, stigma, if you wanted to talk about it, but also how it's grown and how it's so
Mm,
inclusive, like way more inclusive than I think people think it is. So whatever you wanted to word vomit
yeah.
about that, honestly, was totally fine.
Oh yeah, yeah. Those are great things to bring up. I asked that same question before I got involved in my in-person community. I was scared it was going to be a bunch of dudes, and I don't want to deal with that. Um, so,
Oh my God. Yes.
so I was very pleasantly surprised by a lot of, not only like the AA, but like I was briefly involved in Temple of the Silver Star as well as the OTO. I continue to be involved with the OTO. All of those spaces there's a lot of more diverse people involved, a lot more women involved. And there's been at one point on the East Coast, so there's lots of OTO local groups all over the country and all over the world. But at one point on the East Coast, there was actually all women masters of their local group. So,
Wow.
it's a lot more diverse than it was. Now, your mileage may vary depending on where you are in the country and the culture there. So people don't realize this, but the local culture of various OTO groups is actually very different. Not only structurally, they may do things differently and have like local customs,
Mm.
and like different dress codes are required, and some places don't have dress codes, things like that. But the culture is very different as well, and the people are very different. So some groups have more men than women, some have more women than men, and I would say the overarching vibe of, as you can imagine, by a very queer founder is it's very queer, inclusive, and accepting. And a lot of our members are some flavor of LGBT, all the way up to the very tops of our leadership in OTO. And I think that's reflected in the policies of how inclusive It is, and there is, the OTO developed a diversity task force to sort of evaluate things and sort of bring them up to speed, and so everyone can have as best experience as possible while also staying true to the magic. So, people have this weird notion that Thelema is like, I don't know, very conservative, and it's just couldn't be further from the truth. Quite an eclectic, diverse, rainbow group of people, for lack of a better word.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Were there, I guess my last question before I kind of go into the next thing was, are there any misconceptions about Thelema that you think we did not address today? I actually think we addressed a lot of them throughout our
Yeah, we
conversation.
got we got into it
So
today.
we
Yeah.
did.
I guess the last one, I'd like to talk about is if Thelema is black or dark magic. Because I
Oh,
see that a lot. Even in like occult bookstores, people like, oh, here's the left-hand pack, put the Thelema books over there. And it's like, whoa, hold on, what are you doing? And so first of all, I think the distinction between right-hand path and left-hand path has gotten muddied so much that everyone has a different definition, and it's like it's not even worth talking about. But from my perspective, in the general definitions of left-hand path in terms of it being purposely subversive, and in aligning yourself with sort of like materialistic gain, that's like the opposite of Thelema.
mm,
So Thelema makes use of tools that like mystical practices, rituals, all of that stuff that are effective, and your mileage may vary there. But the ultimate goal is to travel up that tree of life and return to the absolute all and connect with that divinity. It's again aligning yourself with this divine spark, your HGA, obtaining that knowledge and conversation that you can know your will and then do it. And so, I mean, obviously, people can interpret that different ways, but I don't know. Trying to return to the divine source doesn't sound very left-hand path to me.
no, it doesn't. I agree. Those definitions. I actually just put a poll up on my YouTube about how people perceive the left hand versus the right hand path
Oh, nice.
because you're right. Those those labels have gotten so convoluted over time, and they don't
Mhm.
even mean what they originally meant from, because I think they originate from like Tantra. And regardless, I think that those definitions have been so convoluted over time. And I see Thelema just as an outsider's perspective. It feels
Mhm.
very right hand path to me, with maybe a left hand path approach in the terms of individualism. That's the only way that I could see it. Like, I don't see it as evil or bad. And honestly, to be for real right now, I don't think the left hand path is bad or evil or black
No, I
magic
don't either. Yeah.
anyways. Yeah, that's a whole nother conversation. So I see it as being maybe a little bit both, but definitely right hand path with that union as the ultimate goal. So
Yeah, I would sort of view it as like both. I would sort of view
yeah.
it as both or neither outside of that binary
Hmm.
for sure. Yeah, I
Hmm.
agree with you.
Yeah, definitely. Last question for you, and then I want to talk about maybe some advice that you have for beginners
Yeah,
as
yeah,
far as
yeah.
resources go. Do you think that Thelema is compatible with other spiritual practices? I already know the answer to this, but if you want to elaborate.
Yeah, sure, sure, why not? I'm not the like religious police. Um, you know, uh, People can have whatever religious beliefs they want and whatever capacity they want and whatever understanding they want. I mean, obviously, we just had a conversation about early on about how we understand the world is unique to us and the symbols we have, and I think that's how we approach the divine. So, yeah, of course, people are going to understand religions differently and integrate them differently and use labels or not use labels however they arrive at that. So, I mean, obviously, there are some beliefs in certain religions that are directly opposed to Thelema. And if someone wishes to still go down that path of like being both, then that's go for it. Manage your cognitive dissonance as thou wilt. I'm not going to tell you no.
Sure.
Jews for Jesus exist. There's plenty of people in all configurations of stuff. So go for it. But
Yeah.
and within that line too, Thelema is not a closed practice, as I mentioned before. So, I hope this helps people. That's the ultimate goal of my work, is to help people discover how beautiful they are, And if some of our tools help you do that, do that. And if you don't want to call yourself a Thelemite, even though maybe you're doing Resh, every day, that's fine,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah, we've definitely had conversations before where you've mentioned how Thelema, like you can be a Thelemite and something else. You don't have to be just a Thelemite, I guess is the point that I was getting at. Like, for example, if I went down this rabbit hole for myself, being a Thelemite and a chaos magician, that there is
Mhm.
definitely some commonalities there and being able to practice both. So just kind of wanted to get your opinion on that because
Oh,
how
yeah.
far do you think well, I guess it's up to the individual's perception and interpretation, I'm sure, is the answer.
Yeah, well, I mean, chaos magic is basically one of the children of Thelema through Austin
Mhm.
Osman Spare,
Mhm.
who was a student in Aleister Crowley's AA. So there's like chaos magic is literally directly out of Thelema, so that's a easy marriage to
Yeah.
make, I think.
Yeah.
Easy, and there are a lot of people who identify with chaos magic, and Thelema. So chaots and Thelemites there's a big pancake stack overlap there for sure. Um, I think it is a little bit more challenging for people who, maybe more of an old Aeonic religion and incorporate that with Thelema. It's not impossible, but you have to, maybe work on that a little bit. And understand that your understanding may be different than other people's, and that's fine. I mean, again,
Yeah.
I'm not the religion police for sure, and I think we should have, at least in this context of this conversation, we should have space for people to explore their path as they will. And their understanding. I think it comes from a place of ego and arrogance to deny people the autonomy, and deny people the respect to understand themselves the way they do. Go
Yes.
for it.
Yeah, yeah, I agree with that. It just kind of made me, this is a total tangent, has nothing to do with what we were just talking about. Well, kind of, but talking about how chaos magic and Thelema are so kind of intertwined at certain points. We
Sure.
definitely also experience hate, but for different reasons. Like, I don't think either one of our traditions are taken seriously by the wider community, and it's mainly because they just
Mhm.
don't understand what it is that we're actually doing. I mean,
Yeah.
the hate that you get is definitely different than the hate that I get. Usually people just don't take me seriously.
Yeah.
Usually they just say, "Oh, you're fucking off with Pokemon or whatever." So they just don't think it's an actual philosophy, or there isn't,
Mhm.
they don't understand the psychology portion of it and how much work goes into deconditioning your mind and paradigm jumping and things like that. So,
Mhm.
I just kind of wanted to touch on you get so much hate in your comments from people that are just shit, that people just don't get it at all. And I'm so sorry. And I really hope that that changes for you. And also, are you okay? I've asked this to another practitioner. Like, I've asked this to someone else that, like, yeah, oh, who did I ask this to? Oh, I had interviewed someone that is practices working with demons, and they get the
Mm,
same, similar kind of hate online. So,
sure.
are you okay? Just checking in with you.
Thank you. I need that. I'm okay. I mean, I'm very fortunate that I have thick skin and can deal with it.
Yeah.
But it is sad because I part of I would say occult spaces, ceremonial magic, including Thelema, has issues with misogyny. It just does, and a lot of people don't realize how their perception of reality is clouded.
Mm.
You talked about deconditioning. Absolutely. And people are like, "Oh, I'm just telling it like it is," and it's like you're just repeating propaganda you've been fed since a child. Like I can see that in you coming out, and so I feel sorry for those people who judge people based on the way they look and not the quality and content of what they're writing and what they're saying.
Yeah.
And so yeah, our small occult communities like to think of themselves as better than the general society, but the truth is they are not. They are a microcosm of the macrocosm in which they exist. And a lot of people in our communities come right in with whatever baggage and dogma and programming they have from a lifetime of being fed this from these values, these thoughts, and the shade in which they view the world. Um, Here, especially since the passing of our beloved David Lynch, I will offer a David
Mhm.
Lynch quote that really just sums it up. And that's people think they understand the way the world works, but in reality, they experience a limiting of the imagination. And I just think that's so true. So there's a lot
Yes.
of people in my beloved community, or people adjacent to my beloved community, who just take one look at me and my appearance or the title of my videos and assume I'm watering down Thelema. They assume I'm don't know what I'm talking about. And it's weird because I do the work, and I am surrounded by, the elders of the community in multiple ways through organizations, but also through my household and personal life. And I have people they probably admire look over my work, look over my scripts to my videos, and it's funny. When it comes from my mouth, it's wrong, but when it comes from someone else's mouth, it's right.
Oh my
And
God.
again, and again, that really speaks to how sad someone is, and how they're really living in such a, pathetic state. But anyway, that's a bit of a
Mhm.
tangent.
Mhm.
Yeah, I'm okay, but it is hard.
Yeah, it is wild to me just talking about being a female passing, content creator in general, how much hate that
Mhm.
we can get, particularly from a very specific group of humans, I
Oh
will
yeah,
say, just not
yeah,
being taken seriously because you're a woman in the occult. That absolutely still exists, not just in Thelema. I mean,
100%.
yeah, we all experience it, and it's honestly exhausting. And it's so funny that I'm gonna share, oh gosh, I don't know. I'm an oversharer, so I'm just gonna do it anyways. But I have actually done experiments on my videos. I can't believe I'm admitting this right now, but I've done experiments on my videos with the way that I style my hair, the way, like,
Mhm,
the different outfits I wear, also the tone of voice. I've learned to drop my tone of voice and
mhm,
speak more aggressively. And I found that in doing these things and experimenting with different aesthetics, just purely aesthetic, the words that I'm saying are the exact same. It's just the delivery and the appearance of the words.
mhm,
I have gotten more respect from certain groups of people, and it's wild to me because I'm not saying anything different. I'm the same person I've always been.
mhm.
And it's just
Yeah.
wild to me how, if you're hyper feminine, if you talk in a soft, high pitched voice, or if you exude any sort of femininity whatsoever, you're not taken seriously. People think you're dumb, and it's exhausting. So yeah, it's
Mhm.
just this reflects a total broader problem in
Yeah,
our community that I'm ranting on right now. But
absolutely.
yeah. So anyways, props to you for putting the content out there that you do
Yeah,
and
and props to
sticking to
you
that.
too. Absolutely.
We're gonna stick in this together. No, just kidding.
Yes.
It's not everyone. It's just a select few of individuals, of course. So, okay, advice for beginners. If somebody were interested in this practice, where would you point them? Do you have some books, resources, etc.?
Yeah, so my first advice is this is a long path and a long haul. Don't burn your biggest challenge is going to be burnout. So take things slow, take things meticulously, and be kind to yourself
Mm.
in this path. So be ready for big studying over a long period of time and a lot of practice. It took me about a year to have a big breakthrough in my work, so your mileage may vary. It could take many years. So I think that's about a time frame you should expect, though. It's not going to be overnight. It's really a lifetime. You're setting on a path of a lifetime.
Yeah.
So in terms of books, I'm going to recommend for someone who's brand new, you might want to start with something like the Weiser Concise Guide to Aleister Crowley. So this is a great book because this will give you like a taste of not only Crowley but also Thelema as a list of the holy books. It's just like a real quick sampler of a bunch of stuff at once. It also clearly explains how the major Thelemic organizations, including OTO and AA, work. And like how to go about contacting as well. So all of that's in there. So that's a nice primer. Other nice primers are going to be, I was going to pull out a book, but they're all behind me.
Okay.
Living Thelema by David Shoemaker. And then he recently followed that up with The Way of the Will, which is like Living Thelema Part 2. So if you want a different approach, go ahead and get a copy of Living Thelema and The Way of the Will. And that's just going to be a really good primer for you. It gets into a lot of stuff. The Way of the
Mm.
Will is a little bit more advanced. And he uses jargon that he expects you to know from Living Thelema. The next
Before you move
thing,
on to the next one, I just want to say that Maevius Lynn also has a book club, and I think you guys are
yes.
you're reading that book right now, aren't you?
Yes, we are.
Okay.
We are reading The Way of the Will. We have two book club sessions left, and on the last one, David Shoemaker will actually be joining us. So you have a
Wow.
chance to interact with the author directly and ask him questions, comments, tell him how much you loved the book or hated it. Actually, everyone in the book club has loved the book. But yeah, so that's a great opportunity for people. And what
Very
else would I
cool.
recommend? Oh, I should recommend. Milo Duquette. He's an amazing writer. He
Love
wrote a
him.
book called The Magic of Aleister Crowley. If you want a primer for Qabalah, he wrote a book called Chicken Qabalah,
My
and then
favorite.
eventually Son of the Chicken Qabalah. So Lon's great. Um, I'm also going to plug Colin Campbell's book. I think the title of his book is just Thelema. It's through Llewellyn, and Colin Campbell's also a really accessible writer. I'll throw out there as if you want like a more personal touch to understanding it, Rodney Orpheus, fantastic writer. Shout out to him. And then of course I've got to also plug, I just plugged the Weiser Concise Guide, but I'm also going to plug the best biography of Aleister Crowley, which is Perdurabo. Um, and
Yes.
there is an audiobook of that just came out. It's also translated into Spanish as well as English. So that is a factual based biography as opposed to like a dramatic fictional one. And obviously there's other good biographies like Tobias Churton and stuff, but Perdurabo is like the one to go to. And then once you feel like you are ready to approach the holy text, dive right in. Get a copy of the Book of the Law and the Laws for All. Maybe read Magic and Theory and Practice by Aleister Crowley. That's a really accessible one, writing by his. And
Mhm.
just keep in mind, any of the holy books or his channel texts are going to be very difficult to understand versus things that were written by him as a person for other people.
Sure.
So
Sure.
something
Very
like
cool.
Magic and Theory and Practice, for example, was Crowley writing as himself for you all to read, and it's much more accessible.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you so much for giving us a little
Yeah.
recap. And also, thank you for sharing all of your knowledge today and
Oh my
getting a little bit
gosh.
more personal. I really appreciate that. I know a lot of occultists find it really uncomfortable to kind of share the personal aspects of their practice. So I appreciate you sharing what you are willing to do. And yeah, I think this was just a really good conversation. We hit so many different points today.
Yeah.
This is so fantastic. I think this is going to be really helpful for a lot of people. So thank you again. And also, I adore Maevius Lynn. Please, please, please go check out her YouTube channel and all the workshops and everything. I'll link all that stuff in the description box. And then also the books that were mentioned. We'll write that down and put that in the description box too. So thank you. Appreciate you for being here.
Oh my gosh, thank you so much. Appreciate you
Yes.
so much. What a joy it is to come on and chat with you on your channel and just know you as a person in the world because you do amazing
Oh,
work. So thank you so much.
look at us gassing each other up this whole call because we just adore each other. No. All right. Thank you all so much for watching this video. I'll see you all again soon. Bye, everyone.